So, SDCC is over, and we've finally got the next slate of Marvel movies. Now that we know what the next 2 to 3 years of the MCU are going to look like, what's left to say except... I mean, Blade is probably going to be solid, assuming they don't neuter the violence and scares, and them making Doctor Strange 2 into a straight-up cosmic horror film sounds immensely promising, but the most surprising announcement for me was the concept for Thor: Love and Thunder. After Ragnarok, Infinity War, and Endgame, Thor 4 was probably my most anticipated MCU movie right behind Guardians 3. But then they made the announcement, and my excitement for it plummeted to the absolute bottom of the list. Why, you ask? Simple, because I'm an angry white dude who hates women and minorities. Nah, I'm just kidding, but I'd be lying if I said my newfound disinterest in Thor 4 had nothing to do with the reintroduction of Jane Foster. In the movies since Ragnarok, Thor has gone from being the most boring MCU protagonist to my absolute favorite. He's a hero who lost everything, who has endured such a shitload of suffering over the course of his story, and who has changed drastically to rise above it all. I'd say I like the majority of MCU protagonists, but I'd also say the majority of them are pretty static characters, at least compared to Thor.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
I'm so engaged in his storyline and character growth, even though they kinda turned him into a joke in Endgame, but that movie left him in such an interesting place. His family's dead, he's ceded the throne of New Asgard to Valkyrie, he's joined the Guardians of the Galaxy. He's finally figured out what he's suited for in life, dumping any notion of destiny to forge his own path as a wandering hero through the depths of space. This is such a fascinating place to take the character, and I can't wait to see what they do with him next. Will he be a major player in Guardians 3? Will we see him pass Stormbreaker onto Beta Ray Bill? Could Hela or Surtur return for round 2? Will he run into the alternate timeline Loki from Endgame, leading to, like, a fun inversion where Thor is overjoyed that his little brother is alive again, while Loki is still stuck in 2012 and can't understand why Thor is being so nice to him after he just tried to conquer Earth? Nope, we're bringing back Jane Foster, the blandest love interest in the entire MCU, and that's saying something, and adapting one of the most reviled modern Marvel storylines through the lens of a romantic comedy. Was anyone actually asking for Jane Foster to come back? Did anyone actually miss her? I don't dislike Natalie Portman as an actress. I actually think she's pretty goddamn solid when she's in her element, but it is so obvious that she didn't care about doing these movies. It always felt like these were just paychecks for her, and now it seems like she's only coming back because Thor is everyone's favorite Avenger. Ragnarok was so widely acclaimed because it did something different with Thor. It didn't try to tell the same boring romance between two characters who have next to no chemistry with each other. It was a stylish, hilarious space opera fantasy road trip where loads of insane shit happened.
You're officially pardoned from life.
So you can understand how this new concept for the fourth Thor film feels like a step backwards in some respects. I mean, I love Taika Waititi, and I love Thor Ragnarok, but the panel announcement just didn't leave me feeling all that excited for Thor Love and Thunder. But it did get me thinking. This isn't the first time the MCU has announced something that, on paper, sounded kinda questionable. And it's not the first time that they've announced that they were adapting what is widely considered to be a pretty bad comic. I asked myself, if I were in Taika Waititi's position, how would I make this film in a way that doesn't feel regressive or pandering? And this is what I came up with. Obviously this takes place after Endgame, but before Guardians 3, so maybe the Guardians can have a little cameo in the beginning or something. I like to think they're securing a rare source of Uru metal, the stuff that Thor's hammer is made out of, for reasons that will make sense in a moment. So that could be our fun little opening action sequence, sorta like how Ragnarok opened with Thor fighting Surtur. The point is, we learn a bit about what he's been up to since the last time we saw him. But now Thor has to leave the Guardians for a while, because he's got his own project to work on. This is why Thor, and maybe Rocket and Groot, can take a trip back to Nidavellir to see Peter Dinklage. You see, since the end of Endgame, the Dink has been working on getting the Forge re-established with the help of Thor and the Guardians. And the reason for this is because Thor has a hell of an order for him to fill.
Gingy! Fire up the ovens, Muffin Man! We've got a big order to fill!
That order? Hammers, and lots of them. You see, Thor has learned a few things in the past couple of years spent dealing with Thanos. 1. Heroes aren't infallible. The Avengers are mighty, but they still lost hard to Thanos before they managed to win again via a total Hail Mary. And even then it was a close call, too close for comfort as far as Thor is concerned. 2. That while he's still worthy, he isn't the only worthy individual in the universe. If Cap could lift the hammer, then statistically there must be other worthy beings out there. 3. Captain Marvel was right. Not every planet has Avengers. Carol, one of the heaviest hitters on the team, had to completely abandon them up until like the last 5 minutes of the fight against Thanos, all because there were other people to help. Maybe not every planet could have their own Avengers, but they could have their own Thor. And if every planet had its own Thor when they were dealing with Thanos, maybe they wouldn't have lost anyone. So Thor is collecting Uru metal and helping Eitri form a whole swath of magical hammers for a single purpose, founding what I like to call the Thor Core. Valkyrie is watching over New Asgard, the Guardians are off to track down Gamora, so Thor is free to scout across the universe, finding individuals worthy of possessing the power of a god. So let's say he starts his search on Earth, because why not? Maybe we get some fun cameos from the new Avengers, all trying yet again to lift Mjolnir at some sort of Thor tryouts. Maybe while Thor sits there with a clipboard and judges them. This could also actually be a pretty decent way to explain how the hammer's magic actually works, and why someone like, say, Iron Man wasn't worthy of lifting it, but Cap was, since it varies so much in the comics. But now that we're on Earth, this is where we're reintroduced to Jane Foster. She's still basically the leading authority on all things Asgard along with Dr. Selvig, and she's currently in the process of studying a once-in-a-lifetime find. Not one of these new Mjolnirs or an alternate timeline Mjolnir, the original Mjolnir, the one Hela broke. Turns out the chunks of it have been recovered, and now it's up to Jane to figure out what makes the hammer tick. Like Thor said way back when, magic is just science that humans don't understand yet. And this is where the first major deviation from the Lady Thor storyline in the comics will take place. In the comics, the gist of it is that Jane becomes the new Thor because Thor himself is no longer worthy. He loses faith in the gods and goes on a sabbatical to find himself, so Mjolnir seeks out a cancer-stricken Jane Foster and gives her the power of Thor so that Midgard can have a protector. Seeing as how the last time we saw Thor in the MCU, this happened,
I'm still worthy.
I feel like it would seem kind of super backwards to suddenly have him be unworthy yet again. There's only so many times you can do the Thor lost his hammer and needs to learn to be humble again storyline. If we want Thor to keep moving forward as a protagonist, this means that him being unworthy can't factor into it. We've sung that song 3 times so far.
Let's grow up, shall we?
He's such a bitch!
It also kind of cheapens the impact of moments like Cap and Vision lifting the hammer if just any good guy can pick it up and receive the powers of Thor. The more people there are in the Can Lift Mjolnir club, the less impressive that club becomes, you know what I mean? So in my version of the story, Jane isn't going to get her powers from Mjolnir, at least not by lifting it. She'll be running some experiments on the fragments, something will go wrong, she'll get blasted with arcane energy, and kablamzo, now she has Thor powers. Mjolnir in the MCU has basically been outed as a conduit. It channels the power of Thor through it, but it doesn't turn the holder into Thor. Cap could call down thunder and swing it around, but he didn't get Asgardian armor or strength increase or anything like that, at least as far as we could tell. So now Jane has Thor powers, but with no hammer to channel her newfound strength through, and she is freaking out. Remember, she is not an operative or a spy or a fighter pilot, she's just a normie-ass civilian scientist who can now suddenly shoot lightning from her fingers and punch through concrete. I'm picturing something similar in tone to Shazam. I feel like the idea of, holy hell, how does this body even work, would mesh really well with Taika's comedic sensibilities.
I'm invisible! I'm right here. I'm right here. I'm invisible! I'm invisible! Hey! Nice outfit, dipshit.
So naturally, she and Thor cross paths, and things get a little awkward, as one might expect. I feel like the low-hanging fruit is to have Thor try to win Jane back, but honestly, I don't like that idea. Think about it, Jane was basically just the first hot Earth woman Thor met after got cast out from Asgard. She's attractive, he's attractive, so they had a little on-off romantic fling that lasted like a year or two. And then she broke up with him because even though he's a good guy and all, he comes with a lot of baggage. Also, the whole almost got turned into a super weapon by elves thing. Dark World took place in 2013, Ragnarok in 2018, so including the Endgame time skip, there's a chance Thor and Jane have been broken up for literally 10 years at this point. Now put yourself in Thor's shoes. You've gone through a lot of shit in the past decade, and changed and grown, and you've finally gotten your life together. You finally have some sense of who you want to be. And then suddenly, you run into this girl you kinda had a 1 to 2 year on-off relationship with a decade ago. Does getting her back really become your priority? I think when it comes to romance, men are way more complex than a lot of movies give them credit for. And I think it would be way more interesting if Thor was the one who had moved on and no longer wanted a relationship. Maybe Jane is reconsidering dumping him now that he's matured and has no more family drama to deal with, and she'll just have to learn to move on as well and accept that they're just friends now. I think the standard surprise, you don't get the person you're romantically interested in ending would actually be really subversive and interesting if done from a female perspective, since we so rarely see that in movies like this. It could also help dispel this gross narrative that a woman is weak if she's romantically interested in a guy rather than the other way around, but honestly that's an entirely different discussion.
Next.
So anyway, back to our main plot. Jane has Thor powers, and Thor is actually pretty pleased, if a bit concerned. He knows and trusts Jane, and now that she's got powers, that makes her a prime candidate for being the first member of the Thor Corps. So he begins training her, and this is where the conflict comes in. You see, Thor is trying to mentor Jane the same way Odin mentored him, in that he's trying to make her understand pain, sacrifice, and loss so that she'll be quote-unquote worthy.
You're a vain, greedy, cruel boy!
I beg to differ, Father. Here, have some candy.
But Thor and Jane have very different ideas of what worthy means. In Jane's mind, she's already worthy. Why wouldn't she be? She and Thor go way back, so what's the issue with just giving her the stupid hammer so she can use her powers to help more people? But from Thor's perspective, he only became this better version of himself through overcoming all the shit he's had to deal with in the past few movies. Thor feels like she's not taking this seriously, Jane feels like Thor doesn't trust her, and neither is really willing to empathize with the other's perspective. This conflict is where we set up our two main protagonists for some growth and change later on. Meanwhile, you gotta have a villain. Which Thor character would physically and thematically be a good fit for this story? It'd have to be someone who isn't a total bore, but presents a sizable chore for Thor and Thor to fight in Thor 4. Someone who could conceivably mop the floor with the Thors. Could it be Grandpa Bor? Nah, according to lore, Bor was Thor's forefather and Odin's mentor. I'd imagine Thor likes Bor, so he would be a poor choice for Thor 4. Also, he's dead. What about Ares, god of war? A fight between him and the Thors would hardly be a snore, but you'd have to be careful about toning down the gore. Enchantress? She's kind of a whore, but not a bad choice if Thor is looking to score. But they'd have to be tasteful or else cause an uproar. Or maybe her teacher, Karnilla, Queen of the Norns. But Taika said he was inspired by Jason Aaron's run on Thor, so does that mean gore? Sure. Gore the God Butcher seems like a solid pick, given how prominent he was in Aaron's run and how much of this movie seems to draw from those particular comics. Basically, Gore doesn't like gods because they had forsaken him or whatever, so now he wants to create a godless world because they're not worthy of that much power. This seems like a natural fit for a post-Endgame MCU. Maybe he was a victim of the snap and just wants to rid the universe of all forms of supreme power. No more Infinity Stones, no more gods, no more Titans, no more Celestials, no more Avengers. Maybe he lost his family when Asgard was destroyed, and feels especially resentful towards Thor for being stuck on Sakaar while Hela was running around slaughtering everyone.
Those foundations are gone, sorry.
And when he gets wind of the Thor Corps, naturally he's against it, so he sets out to kill both Thor and Jane before destroying the Dwarf Forge for not only making Thor all these weapons, but for making the Infinity Gauntlet as well. The rest kinda writes itself. Thor and Jane have friction, reconcile to fight Gore, and they both grow to understand and trust one another a little bit more. Thor gives her a hammer, maybe make it look like the ultimate Mjolnir for some visual variety, and we learn what it truly means to be worthy of the power of Thor.
Everyone fails at who they're supposed to be, Thor. The measure of a person, of a hero, is how well they succeed at being who they are.
It's not about heroic feats, or royal blood, or the amount of suffering you've endured. It's all about being the right person, in the right place, at the right time, and then going on to do the right thing with that opportunity you've been given. Or something like that. So the movie ends with Thor and Jane parting amicably. Maybe have a scene where she assumes he's gonna go for the standard Hollywood romantic goodbye, only for Thor to clap her on the shoulder and give her a nice friendly handshake as he leaves. And then he immediately breaks into tears and starts hugging Korg and Meek, declaring them to be the closest thing to brothers he's had since Loki died, thanking them for staying there in his darkest moments. And that's how the movie ends. Jane is now the de facto Asgardian hero of Earth, Thor flies off into space to continue distributing hammers, and everyone lives happily ever after. Then during the credits, you slip in a tease for Beta Ray Bill, maybe another post-credit that shows what the Guardians are up to before Volume 3, and you got yourself another hit. Oh right, Valkyrie. I'm gonna be honest, the announcement that Valkyrie is canonically bisexual felt kinda bittersweet. Like, I personally don't care what sexuality or imaginary space Viking is, but sure, representation is important, and it's nice to see that in such a major franchise. But then I remember how Disney demanded a scene in Ragnarok that would have hinted that Valkyrie was bi be removed, for fear of hurting the film's distribution chances in China. And also how they edited a line in Endgame for Russia, removing any mention of that one gay dude in Cap's support group. It's clear to me that Disney doesn't really give a fuck about representation and is only letting them do this in the first place because their market research indicated that gays are profitable now, and that including them in Thor 4 won't be a bad investment moving forward. Everyone applauding Disney for this needs to understand, you're being marketed to by a company that has zero compunctions with ignoring or even outright erasing marginalized groups, so long as it keeps their profit margins stable. And don't even get me started on how willingly Disney's been censoring their older movies and properties, so they can pretend they've never made anything remotely questionable that might cause people to hesitate giving them money now. But hey, apparently the love in Love and Thunder is going to refer to Valkyrie, and how she's going to choose a queen to rule by her side. I'm going to assume it has to be a queen because, let's be real here, saying she's bi and then having her end up with a dude would cause actual riots in the street. I honestly don't find the subplot that interesting. Relationship drama tends to be the weakest part of the MCU by far, with maybe like 2 or 3 exceptions tops. But hey, from where I'm sitting, there's 3 ways that love can go.
That's good, bad, or mediocre.
First off, the worst case scenario. Valkyrie ends up with Jane or some other existing female character who wasn't bi or gay up until this point when the script decided they should be. It'd just come off as both lazy and kinda skeezy in my opinion, not to mention it would make the world feel much, much smaller. Next up, a few hey, that's fine I suppose scenarios. Scenario A, they introduce a new character who Valkyrie develops a romance with and eventually marries. Maybe like a royal advisor or handmaiden or the captain of her guard or something like that. Scenario B, she pulls a Princess Diaries 2 royal engagement and says, I'm in charge and I say I don't need to marry anyone. Bit of a cop-out, but not a bad message by any means. Scenario C, she marries Bruce Banner and Hulk becomes the Queen of Asgard. She and Hulk absolutely got freaky back on Sakaar, and she and Bruce had really genuinely cute chemistry. It's kinda perfect, and would mean Hulk had a really strong chance of reappearing in future Thor adventures, which is an A+ in my book. But again, the people who obsess over the sexuality of superheroes in children's sci-fi fantasy films would flip their shit if a bisexual woman still decided to date a straight man, so I don't really see this happening. And finally, the best case scenario for the Valkyrie romance subplot, she marries Meek, who has been a female this whole time. Who'd have thunk it?
Is that some sort of protoplasm, all the stuff that's coming out of you, or are they eggs? Looks like eggs.
Cross the rainbow bridge of Asgard, where the booming heavens roar. You'll behold in breathless wonder the god of thunder, mighty Thor.
But presents a sizable chore for Thor and Thor to fight in Thor 4. Someone who could potentially mop the Thor... Fuck. I'm keeping all these.